Hi, I'm Sarah Green. I'm here today with Daniel Isenberg, an entrepreneur and professor at Babson. He's the author of Worthless, Impossible, and Stupid: How Contrarian Entrepreneurs Create and Capture Extraordinary Value. Dan, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
So Dan, your book really pushes against some of the common myths about entrepreneurship. And one of those, for instance, is that entrepreneurs need to be innovative. Why is that a myth?
Well, it turns out that there is a lot of entrepreneurship, extraordinary value creation and capture, without innovation. Of course, they overlap, and a lot of entrepreneurship is innovative, and a lot of innovation is entrepreneurial, but there are lots of examples of entrepreneurship which don't have any innovation in them at all.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. So one example is in generic pharmaceuticals. And as everyone knows, there are generic pharmaceutical companies that are formed, and some of them grow to be quite big and create value for the marketplace, customers, for their shareholders, et cetera. But a generic product and a generic pharmaceutical is inherently non-innovative. That's the definition of generic, that there is no innovation in it at all. Yet, would we say that someone who founded a generic pharmaceutical company and grew it to several $billion, such as Actavis in Iceland, isn't an entrepreneur? Well, of course, we'd say that that was a great example of entrepreneurship. Zero innovation.
So then one of the other myths in that case is that entrepreneurs need to be experts. And you say that's also a myth. So tell us about that one.
Well, that one surprised me myself as I was putting the book together, and I looked at all of the dozens of examples that are in the book. And as you know, those are entrepreneurs not from, I hesitate to say it, SV, Silicon Valley, which is almost not mentioned in my book, by the way. I began to look at their backgrounds, and an extraordinary number of them, over 50%, really started their ventures when they knew nothing about what they were getting into, or very little, yet they were very successful. Now, I'm not sure that they were successful because they weren't experts, but in some cases, knowing something too well can get in the way of doing it differently.
Okay, so that brings me to the third myth, and I really liked this one. And that myth is that entrepreneurs need to be young. Tell us why entrepreneurs can be any age.
Well, as it turns out, they can be. That's an empirical fact. The famous example, of course, is Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's. But there are many examples. Partly it depends on how you define young. And as it turns out, the official definition of young is actually increasing. So it started out about 10 years ago as young was defined, and by countries who would do surveys on youth, as 25. Well, I can tell you it's gone past 35 now, the official definitions. I think that at the rate that the definition of youth is changing, I'll be young in a few years. But it turns out that there are lots of very successful entrepreneurs who started when they were 40 or 45. And as it turns out, it doesn't hurt, and I'm saying that a little bit facetiously, it doesn't hurt to have a lot of experience in an industry.
So in that case, is that something where you see the older and younger entrepreneurs behave any differently, or
of course, there are differences between young and older entrepreneurs. One of the characteristics of youth is that you tend to have less to lose. And so I think young people are seen, and probably there's a certain amount of truth to it, as more risk-taking because they have less to lose. But at the same time, they have less judgment, and they have networks that aren't as broad. They don't know what a real company is yet. They don't understand what customers are. They don't have the judgment that you get with maturity. So it's very much a mixed bag. And that's why I think you can be young, you can be old, whatever that means, and you can be in the middle and be a successful entrepreneur.
So I'd just like to wrap up by talking a little bit about the title of the book, because we've been busting some of the myths about entrepreneurship today. But does it necessarily follow that you want your entrepreneurs to be worthless, impossible, or stupid?
Well, of course, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But the truth of the matter is that almost all of the examples of entrepreneurship, extraordinary value creation and capture, when they were starting, they looked to most people. They looked to the markets, they looked to the investors, they looked to the business partners, indeed, as worthless, impossible, or stupid. And it's the entrepreneur who somehow takes something that looks valueless to somebody else, and they infuse it with value. And that's what entrepreneurship is.
Well, Dan, it's a great book and a really interesting read. Thank you so much for coming in to talk with us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Great to be here.